Hi everyone, and welcome to our short 10-15 minute video on Unit 517, Principles of Innovation. So I'm going to hand over to our tutor James, who's going to take you through the assignment. Thanks, James.
Thank you. Okay, hello everybody. For this one, Unit 517, what we'll do is we'll talk through in the next 10, 15 minutes some of the ways that you might approach your responses to the questions asked. The overarching theme here is that what opportunities might we be able to develop out for our organizations for innovation, and how to make that a practical reality rather than just people coming with randomized ideas here and there. How do we kind of put some structure and some form around that so that it might actually work over time for us as well? In the current world, we might want to couch this in terms of technology and AI that might be both a reason for innovation and the way that we do innovate effectively across our organizations as well. So that's just better that I might as we go through, but let's get straight into it. There are three kind of golden rules that we might just remind you all of on how to approach these questions. Firstly, we want to define any key terms as we go through the questions. I'll try and illustrate that as we go through. Secondly, is to make sure that we've met the command verb. And there's one thing I want to point out with this one in particular that we should be aware of at level 5. And finally, less is more. So we're going to apply just as many different factors or arguments as we need to do to answer the question and no more. And again, there's opportunities to apply those rules as we go through these questions. Let's begin first of all then. We have what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 questions overall. The first three are to do with understanding the role of innovation within organizations. And the first question is 1.1, examine the reasons for innovation in organizations. If we apply our rules, then the first thing, obviously, I would recommend you do is put a good definition of innovation in here. What is it? What isn't it? Try to use maybe a couple of different sources for this, but overall, what's your definition of innovation that you're going to then run through the rest of the assignment is a good place to start here, I think. Our command verb is examine. That means we're going to inspect these reasons thoroughly to determine their condition. Unless there's more is reasons. So rather than list all the different reasons you can possibly think of, the job here is to select a number of reasons that you think perhaps drive innovation or the need for it in organizations the most. So typically we'd say anywhere between kind of 2 and 4. Here, because it's a fairly light touch examine, I'd probably suggest more towards the 4. You could always kind of do some additional honorable mentions on top of that if you wished, but I think 4 key reasons for innovation organizations might be worthwhile thinking around. And you could even think around internal reasons, external reasons. On the assignment here, you'll see some indicative content for some of the things that you might consider. Typically, it's going to be around growth. It's going to be around external factors that are stressing the organization or compelling it to be different in the future. Change of market conditions, obviously change of technology here as well. So there's quite a bit in there that might require the organization to innovate as a result of usually change in the external or internal environments we're operating within. But that's your job to identify a list, but then also examine those, maybe 4 or 5, something like that would be a good number. Once you've done that, we're going to move on to 1.2, analyze the types of innovation within organization. Now, analyze is a bit more deep than examine, so it's going to have to, really dig these apart in some more detail, perhaps. And your types might include looking at the difference, perhaps between, idea generation and true innovation, maybe informal or formal ways we might innovate. Continual improvement comes in here as well. So if you think about the way we continually improve, we execute something for a while, gather data on the execution, and then we review it, reevaluate that, and we go again. And we do that periodically and cyclically, then you might say that's a nice way to formalize innovation in an organization and is more kind of prescribed way to do it. You might think around just how we again integrate new technologies into that as well. Are we going to innovate in the structure of the organization, in our products and services of the organization? There's quite a bit in there. You might think about innovation led by external or co-creation or joint ventures or working with customers or clients even versus just internal. And you might talk about maybe large innovation, leaps of innovation versus lots of little step size of innovation. So, doing away with the keypad and producing an iPhone, you might say, is a leap of innovation, whereas improving the way the screen works over time might be more the kind of continuing improvement approach. So what you're going to do to analyze this is pick it apart in some detail and figure out, okay, for the 2 to 4 key types of innovation you want to consider here, what do they look like? What do they function like? Maybe just a little bit around what some of their resource implications might be. So not just a list of types, but some analysis of those types is necessary in 1.2. 1.3 then, evaluate factors that support a culture of innovation in organizations. The first thing I do here is potentially to define what a culture of innovation looks like. What would a culture of innovation look like compared to one that isn't innovative? What would the differences in organizations? One that has a culture of innovation, one that doesn't. Try and just describe and maybe define what that would be like. The command verb here is evaluate. There's several evaluate questions in this assignment, which I want to point out here. And evaluation is a very specific command verb. And what it wants you to do is look at pros and cons, forces for and against, the differences in these different areas. But you have to come up at the end of that with a reasoned judgment about what you think around the thing overall as a balance of that critical thinking that's gone on. So it's really important that you apply that evaluation to each of the evaluate questions in order to pass the assignment. So you need to have an opinion, you need to have a point of view at the end of that pros and cons, whys and wherefores thing on each of, in this case, the factors that support that culture. And less is more would be then once you've got that definition of what the culture could be, then you need to consider, okay, what are the factors that support or maybe get in the way of that kind of culture? And then in your view, how important are those factors? What really drives them in practice? What can get in the way of them? What resources are required to make them right? What are the biggest ones in your view that actually do support the culture of innovations? What could you not do without? These are the kind of questions you may ask yourself as you go to 1.3. And again, there's lots of indicative content here to give you some more information what those might be in practice. Learning outcome 2, then we're going to understand the process of managing innovation in an organization. This is making it real now. Again, 2.1, evaluate methods used to drive innovation in an organization. So these are all the kind of techniques and approaches you might use in an organizational context. So brainstorming, mind mapping, gathering feedback and making research, focus groups it mentions here as well. There's a lot of stuff in here. It might be worthwhile bringing one or two kind of models or theories into your answer here as well. In particular, what drives innovation in an organization? You're going to select between 2 and 4 methods. Okay, that's the less is more approach. And again, make sure you meet the command verb by evaluating each of those methods. So maybe a bullet point list or a paragraph form here for each of the methods with your view of each of the methods clearly described here on each, not just a list of methods, please, but actual evaluation of 2 to 4 distinct methods that drive innovation is a key. 2.2, examine the process for innovation in an organization. And again, because these are all saying in an organization, then the implications it means your organization. So please use your own lived experience and what you see around you here as well. The process for innovation then would be, well, what process do you see? Is there research, design, development? Do you have cost benefit analysis going on before we'll commit funds or skills or time towards some innovation? How do we know it's successful? If it is successful, do you have any kind of checks, balances, measures around that? How is it signed off? Who checks in on it? How do stakeholders manage across the piece? What do we do for pilots or test cases before we roll the whole thing out everywhere, for example? What's our evaluation like after we've completed some period of testing or proof of case? And generally, how good are we at developing opportunities that are effective for innovation? So that's looking kind of beginning to end. You might use here a graphic or something that looks like that maps the process out. And examine it means to take each part of those process in detail and put some commentary and narrative around it. Again, not just to explain it, but in some detail to pick it apart and explain how one relates to another and how you come around it would be ideal here. 2.3, discuss the role of the manager in leading innovation in an organization. So again, ideally in some kind of context here, probably your own, your idea is to discuss the role that a manager might take. What does a manager, in your view, need to do and not do here in leading innovation? Again, indicative content's pretty decent here, actually. There's nothing else I would necessarily add to that list. So your role as a manager in championing ideas, stakeholder buy-in and commitment throughout the whole process, beginning to end. It could be that you are involved in establishing communications, monitoring impact, gathering evidence for how not only what we might want to do once we've decided on something, but maybe gathering evidence on what we could do in the first place, opportunities for innovation, maybe your role in trying to gather feedback from frontline workers who often know the most in an organization about where we need to innovate, and gathering feedback so we can disseminate and put a business case forward to people who might need to sponsor a project of innovation around that thing then. So there's quite a bit in that I think you could easily discuss. For a discussion, it's important that you're able to look at either side of the role. Try to look at that from different perspectives to form a discussion. For example, you might think about some of the trade-offs here, the balances. You might think that there are some key elements of this that are maybe compromised by other things that a manager might need to do as well. So just try and play around a little bit with some of the compromises, the friction, the balances in that discussion, different perspectives on it maybe, to make sure you've met that command verb discuss for 2.3. 2.4, analyze the role of stakeholders in the innovation process. What I would do here is first of all lay out who might typically be stakeholders around the innovation process as you've mapped it out in 2.2 maybe, who's involved in that process from beginning to end, and then for each of those stakeholders mapped out across the process, for each of the stakeholders, and again, this lends itself to bullet points or paragraph form here, you're going to analyze their role in that process. So what they're supposed to contribute to the process to make the wheels turn to the next bit, what's really important for them to do and not do around this. And again, there's some ideas, indicative content you could do here to analyze. Again, make sure the analysis is strong. Notice a list of stuff that they might do, but in some detail pick apart why is that part of that process important? What might sometimes get in the way maybe of them doing that role effectively? What do you see in the real world in your experience would be good to bring in here. You might think about the skills they need to do that job. 2.5, finally, evaluate methods used to measure the impact of innovation in an organization. So again, thinking about a real world context here, the methods used to measure could include key performance indicators. You might think of balanced scorecard here, for example, Kaplan and Norton, if you reference that one at this point. You might think around ratings, reviews, market share, reach, satisfaction levels with products and service, all that kind of stuff. What's the end result of effective innovation in the organization? How is it measured? And make sure that the impact of innovation is measured here. You're going to evaluate here, so that means you have to have an opinion overall. What's your overall view of the quality of each method, their importance, and the maybe resources need to make them work and why sometimes they don't work so well? But what's your view of the methods is the key thing here, based on evidence. And the less is more rule is going to be, again, 2 to 4 key ways, methods in which impact may be measured, particularly again around innovation in an organizational context. And that is the end of the assignment.
Thanks so much, James. We hope that you found this video useful. If you do have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact us on cmi@inpd.co.uk, and we look forward to receiving your assignments very soon. Thanks a lot, everyone.